Welcome to Jolene's Stories, where a woman who gave everything finally reclaims it.
My name is Brittany Curtis. I'm 54 years old, and on a Tuesday morning in October, I sat in a bank vault in Knoxville, Tennessee, holding a deed to a building I never knew my mother owned. The paper smelled like old leather and pipe tobacco, the way her purse used to smell, and my hands were steady for the first time in 6 years. The building on that deed had an address I recognized. It was the address my son-in-law Derek printed on every business card he'd handed out for the last 9 years. The auto body shop where he'd built his kingdom. The shop he believed he leased from a faceless management company in Nashville. He didn't know that company was a shell my mother had set up in 1994. He didn't know the woman who signed his rent checks every month through 3 different property managers was the same woman he'd seated at the children's table every Thanksgiving for the last 7 years. He was about to find out. But before that, before the eviction notice, before the 14 voicemails, before I left an envelope on a kitchen counter and drove 300 miles east, I want to tell you what it cost me to learn that the people who love you out loud are not always the people who love you on paper. If this story is hitting somewhere tender, do me a small favor and hit subscribe. Leave a comment with the name of the city you're listening from. I read everyone, especially the ones from women my age who thought they were alone. Welcome back to our channel, where we tell the stories nobody tells at the dinner table. The slow, polite cruelties that happen inside families that look fine in photographs. If you've ever been the quiet one in a room full of people who took everything you gave and called it your job, this story is for you. To understand how I ended up in that vault with my mother's deed in my hand, you have to go back to the year my husband Paul died, and the year my daughter Megan married a man named Derek Hollis, and the slow erasure that happened in the 11 years between. Paul died on a Wednesday in March, 6 years before that morning in the vault. Pancreatic cancer, the kind that announces itself late and finishes quickly. He was 61. We'd been married 32 years. He'd been a high school chemistry teacher, the sort of man who left handwritten notes inside my lunch bag for the first 10 years of our marriage, and never quite stopped, even when the notes became Post-its on the bathroom mirror, reminding me to take my vitamins. When he was diagnosed the first time, Megan was 12, and from that moment forward, I raised her on a schedule built around hospital appointments and remission, and the long, exhausting piece of believing we'd beaten it. We hadn't. The second diagnosis came when she was 26, and 3 months later, I was a widow standing in a funeral home in West Knoxville, accepting casseroles from people I barely remembered. It was at the reception after the funeral that my mother pulled me aside into the small back room of the church and pressed a brass key into my palm. She was 81 then, narrow and sharp as a fence post, and she said, "First Tennessee Bank, downtown branch, box 412. Don't open it until you need to." I asked her what was in it, and she said, "Insurance. The kind your daddy wouldn't have approved of, but I bought anyway." I tucked the key into my jewelry box and forgot about it for almost 6 years. My mother died 18 months after Paul, quietly, in her sleep, on a January morning when the ice was an inch thick on her porch railing. I emptied her house. I sorted her quilts. I never opened the safe deposit box. Grief makes you incurious about logistics. You let things sit because moving them feels like an admission that the people who loved you are not coming back to claim them. In the months after Paul's funeral, Megan was the only person I had left. She was 28, newly engaged to Derek, working part-time at a dental office in Farragut. She'd hug me at the door whenever I visited, and I remember her grip felt like an apology she'd never say out loud. Like she knew, even then, that something was already shifting, and she was trying to hold the old version of us in place with her arms. Derek was 31, broad-shouldered, the kind of handsome that makes waitresses laugh too loud. He'd grown up in Maryville, the only son of a contractor named Kurt, who owned 3 rental houses and treated his wife like a piece of furniture he'd inherited. Derek smiled with all his teeth and called me Miss Brittany, in a voice he must have practiced in a mirror. I wanted to like him. Megan loved him. So I tried. The first year, he asked if Thanksgiving could move to his parents' house in Maryville. Just that once, he said. His mother wasn't doing well. Vertigo, he said. And it would mean so much. I drove 90 minutes each way and was seated at the children's table next to Aiden, who was 3 and crying about cranberry sauce. Derek's mother served me last. I told myself it was fine. I told myself one holiday was not a pattern. By the next November, the Thanksgiving move was permanent. By the third year, I stopped being asked and started being told. The second year, I borrowed Megan's laptop one Sunday afternoon to print a recipe and found a folder on the desktop labeled Christmas Card Final. I opened it. The image on the screen was the photograph we'd taken at Thanksgiving. Megan, Derek, Aiden, Sophie, the 4 of them in matching plaid, and a blank space on the left edge where I had been standing. The original was in a subfolder. In the original, I was there, my arm around Sophie's shoulders, my smile a little tired but real. The edited version had cropped me out and stretched the background to fill the gap. When I asked Megan about it later, gently, she laughed and said Derek had just thought it looked cleaner with the 4 of them. She said it the way you'd describe rearranging furniture. I didn't say anything. I went home, and I put the original photograph in a frame on my mantel, and I told myself a frame on a mantel was the same as belonging. The third year, I had hip surgery. Right side, scheduled in March. 11 days of recovery the surgeon told me to take seriously. I asked Megan to stay for a few nights. She said she would, then she didn't. Then she stopped picking up the phone. When she finally called, 4 days in, she said Derek had told her I exaggerate everything, that I'd be fine, that she was needed at home. I hired a home aide off a flyer at the church. $22 an hour, 6 hours a day, for 11 days. I paid her in cash out of my savings and made my own oatmeal one-handed on the morning she didn't come because her car broke down. Megan visited on day 9 for 20 minutes and brought me a magazine. The 4th year, I drove to pick Aiden up from school, and the front office secretary told me, with the patient face people use on confused elderly women, that I was not on the authorized list. I said there had to be a mistake. I'd been on that list since kindergarten. She turned the monitor toward me. My name had been removed. The contact field showed Derek, Megan, and Derek's mother. I called Megan from the parking lot, sitting in my car with the engine off, and she said she'd look into it, and she never did. Derek had done it quietly, the way he did everything, without telling anyone, without asking, and with a smile in his voice when he eventually explained that it was just easier this way. The 5th year, Megan came over for coffee on a Saturday and asked, in a voice that didn't sound like hers, if I'd consider contributing my pension lump sum, $85,000 from 31 years as a school librarian, to what she called the Family Investment Fund. She used those exact words, Family Investment Fund. I asked what the fund was for, and she said Derek was expanding the shop, that they needed capital, that it would all come back to me eventually with interest. I said no. I said it kindly. I said the pension was what I had left from Paul and from a lifetime of work, and that I needed it to live on. Megan didn't answer my calls for 7 weeks. 7 weeks of voicemails that started chatty and ended in tears. She finally called back the day before Aiden's birthday, and the conversation pretended the silence had never happened. The 6th year, on a Sunday in April, I was at their house for dinner, and I walked past the powder room to find Derek crouched down talking to Sophie in the hallway. He was telling her, in the soft, conspiratorial voice grown men use to make little girls feel important, that Grandma Hollis was her real grandma, and the other one, me, was just the other one. Sophie said it back to him like she was trying to memorize it. She nodded. He smiled and tapped her nose. At the dinner table 20 minutes later, when I passed her the rolls, she said, "Thank you, The other grandma. Megan didn't hear. Derek heard. He looked across the table at me and smiled the same smile he'd worn since the day I met him. The 7th year, Derek hosted a family reunion at a rented lake house on Norris Lake. He told me the original date had been changed, that it was now scheduled for a weekend I was traveling. The following Monday, I scrolled Facebook and saw 43 photos tagged from the reunion that had happened on the original date. Megan in a sundress, Aiden on a paddleboard, Derek grilling, an empty Adirondack chair on the porch in every wide shot, like a place setting at a meal nobody had invited me to. That night, I sat on my bed and I cried for an hour, and then I got up and washed my face and made myself a sandwich because grief does not stop you from being hungry. And I thought about my mother's brass key in the jewelry box, and I thought, not yet. I had not yet learned the difference between being family and being free labor. You learn it slowly. You learn it through the babysitting 3 days a week that nobody thanks you for, the groceries you carry up their porch steps because Megan is always tired, the orthodontist appointments you take Aiden to because Derek can't leave the shop, the school field trip chaperone slots, the snow days, the strep throats at 2 a.m. when Megan calls because Sophie is crying and Derek is asleep. You learn it through the small economies, the car insurance payment you cover 1 month and then every month, the dance class tuition you pay because Megan forgot to register on time, the orthodontia copay you write a check for because the deductible reset and they hadn't budgeted for it. You become the structural support of a household that has decided you don't quite belong in the family photograph. You hold the whole thing up with your back, and they crop you out of the picture. And you keep holding it up because the children are inside the house, and you love them, and because letting go feels like dropping them. It was a Thursday in September when I let go. I'd been to the doctor that morning. The biopsy had come back. Early-stage thyroid cancer, the kind they catch and treat and tell you to be grateful for, with a small surgery and a course of radioactive iodine and a 30-year survival rate north of 98%. I sat in my car in the parking lot of the medical building and called Megan. I told her. I said the word cancer out loud and I waited. She paused. I counted the seconds. 1, 2, 3, 4. And then she said, "Can you still pick up Sophie on Thursday?" I hung up the phone. I didn't slam it. I didn't cry. I just lowered it from my ear and ended the call and sat in that parking lot for 20 minutes watching a maple tree across the lot drop yellow leaves one at a time onto the hood of a parked Honda. I thought about Paul. I thought about how he used to clear his throat before he said something serious, a small dry rasp like a door creaking open, and how I would know to put down whatever I was holding and look at him. I thought about how he would have answered that phone call, how he would have stood up from wherever he was sitting, how he would have driven straight to me. I drove home. I made myself a cup of tea, and I went to the jewelry box on my dresser, and I took out the brass key my mother had given me 6 years earlier, and I held it in my palm until it warmed to the temperature of my skin. Then I drove downtown to the First Tennessee Bank on Gay Street, signed the visitor log, was led into the vault by a young woman in a blazer, and watched her slide box 412 out of the wall. She left me alone in the small viewing room. I lifted the lid. Inside was a manila envelope, soft from age, and a folded piece of paper on top of it that said, in my mother's slanted Palmer method cursive, "For Brit, when she needs it. Mama." I opened the envelope. The first document was a deed. The address at the top was 2847 Magnolia Avenue, Knoxville, Tennessee. The building was titled in the name of a Tennessee LLC called Magnolia Holdings, organized in 1994, sole member and managing officer Eunice Whitfield Curtis, my mother. The second document was a property tax assessment from the previous year. Market value, $740,000. The third document was a copy of a commercial lease, executed 9 years ago between Magnolia Holdings, LLC, a tenant named Derek W. Hollis, doing business as Hollis Auto Body and Collision. Monthly rent $3,800. Term 10 years. Renewal at landlord's discretion at then current market rate. I sat in that viewing room for a long time. I read the lease 3 times. I read the name on the tenant line, and I read the name on the landlord line, and I read them again. 9 years. 9 years he had been writing rent checks to a company whose sole owner was the mother of the woman he'd cropped out of his Christmas card. 9 years my mother had been quietly receiving $3,800 a month from the man who would seat me at the children's table. She must have known. She must have watched him at Thanksgiving the year before she died, and she must have looked at her ledger and known exactly who was paying her. And she'd never said a word. She'd just left me the key. At the bottom of the envelope was one more piece of paper. A letter in her handwriting. 3 pages on the cream-colored stationery she'd used since I was a child. I unfolded it and I read it once, all the way through, and then I had to stop and breathe before I could read it again. She had begun it. My Brittany. Just that. My Brittany. The name only she had ever called me in that exact configuration since I was 4 years old. I read those 2 words, and the tears came so fast I had to set the page down on the metal table and press both hands against my eyes until I could see again. My Brittany, she wrote. If you are reading this, you have finally needed me badly enough to open the box. That means I am gone. And it means something has gone wrong. And it means you are sitting somewhere reading the handwriting of your mother and wishing you could pick up the phone. I am sorry, sweetheart. I would have picked up. You know I would have. I always did. I had to stop there. I sat with that paragraph for a full minute. The way she said sweetheart. The way she said you know I would have. The dry, factual tenderness of her voice. She had been a woman who clipped grocery coupons and balanced her checkbook in pencil, and never once in 83 years told me she was proud of me in those words. But she had bought a building in 1994 with money she'd saved from 40 years of teaching piano in our front parlor, and she had held on to it for 30 years, and she had let her granddaughter's husband sign a lease on it without ever telling him whose name was on the deed. That was how she said the things she didn't say. I read on. I bought that building the year your daddy retired, because I knew one day you would need a thing that nobody could take from you. I did not know who would try. I had my guesses. I have watched Megan since she was little, and I love her, but I know what she chose when she chose that man. I saw it the first Thanksgiving he made you drive to Maryville. I saw it the Christmas card he sent the next year. Yes, I noticed. I notice everything, Britt. I always did, even when you thought I didn't. I laughed. Out loud in the viewing room, a small, wet laugh that surprised me. Of course she had noticed. I want you to understand something, she wrote. There is a kind of man who marries into a family the way a wasp moves into an attic. Quietly, and then in numbers. By the time you notice the buzzing, he owns the wall. Derek is that kind of man. I have watched him at our Easter dinners. I have watched him at the lake. I have watched the way he speaks to you and the way Megan stops speaking when he is in the room. I have spent 6 years hoping I was wrong. I am not wrong. You know I am not wrong, or you would not have opened this box. I read that paragraph 3 times. Each time it landed harder. She had seen it. The whole time from the back of the room, holding her glass of unsweetened tea, my 80-something mother in her cardigan and her sensible shoes had been watching, and she had been building me a door. The building is yours, she wrote. It is held in the LLC. Magnolia Holdings has 1 member, and as of the date of my death, you are that member. The papers in this envelope name a lawyer in Sevierville named Howard Pendergrass, who has been managing the property since I got too tired to do it myself. He has your contact information. He has been waiting for your call. The lease your son-in-law signed expires this year, Britt. You do not have to renew it. You do not have to renegotiate it. You do not have to explain. You can simply decide. That is what the building is for. It is a decision you do not have to ask permission to make. I cried then, quietly, with my hand over my mouth, in the viewing room of a downtown bank vault on a Thursday in September. I cried because the woman who had raised me, who had braided my hair too tightly and made me practice scales until my fingers ached, and told me to stand up straight even at my own father's funeral, had spent the last decade of her life building me a way out of a marriage I wasn't even in. She had seen the cage before I knew I was in it. And she had cut a door. "One more thing," she wrote on the third page. "I left you the building, but I want you to leave them something too. Leave them the empty frame, Britt. Leave them the chair you used to sit in. Leave them the schedule you used to keep. Let them feel the shape of you in the rooms you walked out of. That is the only language people like Derek understand. The language of absence. Do not explain yourself. Do not write a long goodbye. Just go. Take what is yours. Live the rest of your life inside it. And tell my grandbabies, when they are old enough to understand, that I loved them and that I loved you first." She had signed it, "Your mama, always, Eunice." I sat in that vault for a long time. I sat with the deed and the lease, and the 3 pages of cream-colored stationery, and I let the room go quiet around me. The young woman in the blazer eventually knocked softly and asked if everything was all right, and I said yes. I just needed another minute. And she said, "Take all the time you need, ma'am." I took 10 more minutes. Then I put everything back in the envelope, and I put the envelope in my purse, and I walked out into the Knoxville afternoon, and I drove home, and I called the number for Howard Pendergrass, attorney at law, in Sevierville, Tennessee. He picked up on the second ring. When I gave him my name, he said, "Mrs. Curtis, I have been hoping to hear from you for some time. Your mother told me you would call when you were ready." We met 2 days later in his small office above a hardware store on Forks of the River Parkway. He was a thin, courteous man in his late 60s with reading glasses on a chain and a coffee mug that said, "World's Okayest Lawyer." He walked me through the property in detail, the shell company structure, the annual returns, the lease renewal options, the fair market rent for a 6,000 square foot commercial property at that address, $6,200 a month, almost double what Derek had been paying. He showed me the ledger of every check Derek had written for 9 years. He showed me the deposit history. And he asked me, with his pen poised, what I wanted to do. I said, "I want to send him a notice of non-renewal. I want it to come from your office. I do not want my name on the letter. He has 90 days from receipt to either sign a new lease at market rate or vacate the premises." Howard nodded slowly. He took off his reading glasses. He said, "Mrs. Curtis, does your son-in-law know you own his building?" I said, "Not yet." He set down his pen and he looked at me for a long second, and a very small smile moved across his face, the kind a country lawyer makes when justice is about to do its quiet work, and he said, "I'll have the notice drafted by Friday." That was the Thursday. I had 4 days before Derek's 40th birthday party. Megan had been planning it for months. 40 guests at their house in West Knoxville, catering from a barbecue place in Bearden, a custom cake shaped like a vintage Mustang. She had asked me 3 weeks earlier if I would handle the dessert table and the kids' activities, because she didn't trust the caterers with either. I had said yes, of course. That had been before the parking lot, before the phone call, before the 4-second pause. I had not yet uninvited myself. I decided I would go. I went to the print shop on the corner of Kingston Pike on Saturday morning, the day of the party. I had spent the night before in my study with 11 years of family photographs and a pair of scissors and a glue stick and a small printer. I had taken every photograph Derek had cropped me out of, the Christmas cards, the Easter portraits, the lake reunion shots Megan had unwittingly posted to Facebook with the originals still in her phone, and I had put myself back in, sometimes with the original image I'd kept. sometimes with a photograph from the same day that included me, layered in. Sometimes, where no original existed, with a clear print of my face from another year, set into the empty space. Each one I dated. Each one I labeled in small block letters at the bottom with the same 3 words. I was here. I had also asked Howard to print a clean copy of the lease, Derek's signature, my mother's company name, the address, the monthly rent. And I had it framed at a strip mall framing shop in a simple black frame, behind glass, the kind of frame you'd hang in an office to display a diploma. I drove to Megan's house with the framed lease on the passenger seat and a manila envelope of the corrected photographs in the back. I parked across the street. I sat for a minute. I thought of my mother in her cardigan. I thought of Paul clearing his throat. I thought of Sophie at the dinner table calling me the other one. Then I got out of the car. The party was already loud. Derek was in the backyard at the grill, shaking hands with men from the auto shop. Megan was in the kitchen pouring wine and laughing too brightly at something her best friend Carla had said. I set my purse down. I set the manila envelope down on the entry table. I carried the framed lease into the dining room, where the dessert table had been set up under a banner that said 40 and fabulous, and I placed it carefully between the Mustang cake and a platter of cupcakes. I did not say a word. Megan saw it first. She came in from the kitchen with a tray, and she set the tray down on the sideboard, and she walked over to the dessert table, and she looked at the frame. I watched her face move through 3 expressions in 2 seconds. Confusion, recognition. The blank, frozen look people get when they realize the floor is no longer where they thought it was. She picked it up. The glass caught the chandelier light above the dining table and threw a small white square across the ceiling, and the square trembled because her hand was trembling. She read it. She read it again. Derek's name, in his looping signature. The address of the shop. My mother's company name, Magnolia Holdings, LLC, printed in plain black serif type at the top. The signature line, the date, the witness line, the notary stamp pressed into the corner, slightly off-center, the way notary stamps always are. She looked at me. She said, in a voice she meant to keep light but couldn't, "Mom, what is this?" I did not answer. I had rehearsed this silence for 6 months without knowing I was rehearsing it. I let it sit on the dining room table between us, beside the cupcakes and the cake cutter, and a small dish of mints in the shape of car tires that someone had ordered as a joke. By then, 30 guests had drifted in from the kitchen and the backyard, holding plates and napkins, because they had felt the change in the room the way people feel a window opening in winter. Carla stood in the doorway with a glass of red wine tilted slightly in her hand, the wine kissing the rim. 2 men from the shop stopped mid-sentence behind her. A woman I had never met, in a navy dress and a long gold chain, lowered her phone. Derek came in last. He came in through the sliding door from the patio, smelling of charcoal smoke and the cheap citrus cologne he wore on weekends, a pair of tongs still in his right hand. He saw the frame in his wife's hands. He saw my face. He did not yet know what he was looking at, but he knew it was bad. The tongs clicked once against his thigh and then went still. Megan turned to him with the frame still in her hand, the small white square of reflected light skating across the ceiling, and she said, much too loudly, with a laugh that was not a laugh, "Don't make a scene, Mom. You always do this. You always have to be the center of attention. Honestly, you were never really part of this family anyway." The room did not breathe. Somebody's ice cubes shifted in a glass. The refrigerator hummed in the kitchen. Aiden, who was 9, was standing in the hallway in his good button-down shirt with a smear of blue frosting on his cuff, and he was looking at his mother with a face I had never seen on him before. The face of a child who has just learned, in public, what a parent sounds like when the door has come off the hinges. I have replayed that sentence. I have turned it over in my head 100 times since. You were never really part of this family anyway. Spoken in front of 30 guests. Spoken in front of my grandchildren, who were standing in the doorway with frosting on their faces. Spoken by the only child I have ever raised, on the birthday of the man who taught her to say it. I did not answer her. I looked at her for a long moment, long enough for the look to register, long enough for her to remember that the woman she was looking at had wiped her chin and held her hair back over a toilet and sat up nights with her through fevers and stitched the hem of her wedding dress an hour before the ceremony. I looked at Derek. He was already moving. He had set the tongs down on the sideboard gently, the way a man sets down a weapon when he realizes the wrong person is holding the gun. His mouth opened. Nothing came out. He tried again. "Brittany," he said. Wait a second. I picked up my purse. I picked up the manila envelope from the entry table on my way through, and I set it down on the kitchen island as I passed. 11 years of corrected photographs, dated, labeled, 3 words at the bottom of each. I was here. The envelope made a small, soft sound against the granite, like a hand being laid flat on a table. Carla stepped aside to let me through. The woman in the navy dress lowered her eyes. Somebody, near the back, said very quietly, "Jesus." "Mom?" Megan said. Her voice had broken in the middle of the word. "Mom, wait. Mom." I did not wait. I walked to the front door. The hinges gave their usual small complaint, the same complaint they had given for 9 years of Thursday pickups and Saturday drop-offs and snow days and strep throats at 2 a.m. I opened it. I walked down the front steps, 3 concrete steps, the middle one chipped on the right edge where Aiden had dropped his scooter 2 summers ago. I got into my car. I closed the door. I put my hands on the steering wheel and I felt the cool plastic under my palms and I started the engine. Behind me, through the front window of the house, I could see 30 people standing exactly where they had been standing when I left, like figures in a tableau somebody had forgotten to release. Megan was still holding the frame. Derek was looking at the floor. I drove home. I did not cry on the way home. I did not feel the heat in my chest I had always felt before, the choking grief of being misunderstood. I felt the cool, clean weight of a decision that had already been made. I drove past the elementary school where I had not been allowed to sign Aiden out. I drove past the dental office where Megan used to work part-time. I drove past the church where Paul's funeral had been. The streetlights came on as I crossed Kingston Pike. My mother had built me a door. I had finally walked through it. I made tea when I got home. I sat at the kitchen table in the dark for a while, with the porch light off and the kitchen light off, and only the small green digits on the microwave clock giving any color to the room. The phone, face down on the table, lit up once, then again, then again. I did not turn it over. I drank the tea. I went to bed at 9:30. I slept for 9 hours, the deepest sleep I had slept in 6 years. The eviction notice, technically a notice of non-renewal, was hand-delivered to Hollis Auto Body and Collision on Magnolia Avenue at 10 a.m. the following Tuesday, by a process server Howard Pendergrass had retained. I was not there. I have only the description Howard gave me later. Derek had been at the front counter, drinking coffee out of a thermos. The server had asked his name, confirmed his identity, handed him the envelope, and left. Derek had opened it standing up. He had read the first page. He had read the second page. He had picked up his phone and started calling. The first call to my phone came at 10:14 a.m. I did not answer. I was in my kitchen wrapping plates in newsprint, packing the small things first, the way my mother had taught me to pack a house. Top down, fragile to sturdy. The second call came at 10:21, the third at 10:34. By noon, there were 6. By 6 o'clock, there were 11. By midnight, there were 14. I listened to the voicemails the next morning with a cup of coffee, sitting at my kitchen table. The light was coming in low through the kitchen window, slanting across the newsprint and the half-wrapped plates, catching the dust I had stirred up the day before. I listened to them in order. The way you'd watch a man fall down a flight of stairs in slow motion. The first one was a threat. Brittany, I don't know what kind of game you think you're playing, but I am going to sue you for every cent you have. You cannot do this. This is fraud. This is elder financial abuse. I have a lawyer. We will see you in court. His voice was tight, the consonants clipped, the way men talk when they're trying to hold a tremor down inside the words. The second was a demand. Brittany, call me back. Now. We need to talk about this like adults. You cannot just hand me an eviction without a conversation. Megan is here. She wants to talk to you. Call me back. I could hear Megan in the background, behind him, saying something I could not make out, the cadence of it shaped like please. The third was Megan. Just her. Mom, it's me. Please pick up. Mom. That was the whole voicemail. 11 seconds. The fourth was Derek again, calmer, the calm of a man who has been coached by his wife in the kitchen between calls. Brittany, hi. Look, I think we got off on the wrong foot here. Whatever it is you need from me, whatever this is about, let's just talk. Face to face. I'll come to you. Just name the place. By the fifth voicemail, Megan had taken the phone. Mom, please. Whatever this is, we can fix it. Just call me. Please. Please call me. The sixth was silence, and then a hang-up. 28 seconds of breathing, and then the click. The seventh was Derek's father, Kurt, whom I had spoken to maybe 9 times in 11 years. Brittany, this is Kurt Hollis. I don't know what's going on between you and my boy, but you need to call him back. Right now. Today. This isn't how family does. He pronounced family the way some men pronounce mortgage, like a contract he had signed and never read. By the 8th, Derek was back on the line, and his voice had changed. The aggression had drained out. What was left was a man learning in real time that he was not as smart as he had spent his whole life believing. Brittany, listen, I think there's been a misunderstanding. The lease? The building? I didn't know. I swear to you, I didn't know. If I had known, I would have... Please, just call me back. We can work something out. The shop is everything. You know that. The kids' college fund, please. The 9th was Megan crying, not speaking, just crying for 43 seconds into the receiver. At the end, she said, I'm sorry, and hung up. The 10th was Derek again, and he was drinking. I could hear it in the spaces between the words, the slight slur on the S sounds, the way his sentences had stopped having ends. You know what, Brittany? You know what? After everything we did for you, after everything Megan did for you, the way we let you into our home, the way we treated you like... By the 11th, he was begging, the kind of begging that doesn't even pretend to be reasonable anymore. Brittany, please. I'm sorry. I'm sorry for everything. I'm sorry about the Christmas card. I'm sorry about the school list. I'm sorry. Please. I'll do anything. Please pick up. Please. The 12th was Megan. Mom. Aiden asked where you were. I didn't know what to tell him. Please. The 13th was a hang-up. The 14th was Derek, at what sounded like 2 in the morning, in a voice I had never heard him use before. Flat, slow, almost bored. I know you can hear these. I know you're listening. You think you won. You didn't win. You just got even. There's a difference. I deleted them all. I drank my coffee. The light moved across the table. I went back to wrapping plates. I did not need to confront him. The confrontation had already happened. It had happened in a bank vault on Gay Street when a woman who'd been dead for almost 5 years reached through 3 pages of cream-colored stationery and told me to go. I moved to Asheville, North Carolina, 6 weeks later. I picked it because Paul and I had spent our honeymoon there in 1989, and because I had always loved the way the Blue Ridge fog settled over the French Broad River in the mornings. I rented a small second-floor apartment in West Asheville with a screened porch and a fireplace and a view of a maple tree. I had Howard Pendergrass set up the new banking. I transferred everything. I gave the post office a forwarding address. I told 2 old friends from the library where I had gone. I told no one else. I left a single envelope on Megan's kitchen counter on the morning I left town. I drove to her house at 6 a.m. when I knew Derek would be at the gym and Megan would still be sleeping, and I let myself in with the spare key I'd had for 9 years. The house was quiet. The dishwasher had stopped running mid-cycle the night before, and the sour smell of unrinsed plates was rising up from the sink. There was a soccer cleat on the stairs. A school permission slip sat half-signed on the counter, the pen lying across it. I walked to the kitchen. I set the envelope on the counter next to the coffee maker. Inside it were the 11 photographs, the same ones I had left in the manila envelope at the party. Derek and Megan had apparently never opened that one, because Megan had texted me 3 weeks later asking where her mother had gone, with no mention of the photographs at all. So I brought them again. 11 photographs, dated, labeled, 3 words at the bottom of each. I was here. I left the spare key on top of the envelope. I locked the door behind me from the inside, set the latch, pulled it shut. I drove east. The drive took 5 hours and 40 minutes. I crossed into North Carolina around 11. The mountains rose up out of the morning haze the way they had the first time Paul and I had crossed that ridge in 1989, in a borrowed Buick with a paper map folded on my lap. I cried then, but only a little, and only because the mountains had not changed, and Paul had. Derek's shop closed in March, 5 months later. He could not pay the market rate rent. He could not relocate without losing his commercial accounts. He moved his operation to a smaller bay in Powell, paid for by his father, and he laid off 2 of his 3 employees, a man named Hector who had worked for him 8 years, and a young woman named Tara who had been training to be his bookkeeper. Megan went back to work full-time at a different dental office, this one in Halls. The after-school program for Aiden and Sophie cost $1,400 a month, which they had not budgeted for because for 7 years that labor had been free. The orthodontia copay went unpaid for 2 months and the account was sent to collections. The dance class tuition lapsed. Sophie was pulled from her ballet recital because the costume fee had not been wired in time. Derek's mother told him over Sunday dinner. I heard this later, from Valerie, the only person in his orbit still speaking to me, that he had pushed away the only person who actually helped him. He threw a wine glass at the dining room wall. It shattered above the sideboard, the stem snapping off and landing in a fern. His mother did not clean it up. She left it there for him to deal with, and 3 weeks later, Valerie told me, the red stain was still on the wall. Valerie. I should tell you about Valerie. She found me on Facebook 3 months after I left, through a comment Megan had posted publicly mocking me, calling me unstable, ungrateful, a sad old woman who had run away from her own family. Valerie had been Derek's girlfriend in college, at the University of Tennessee, the year before he met Megan. She had not spoken to him in 15 years. She sent me a long message that began, Mrs. Curtis, I don't know you, but I know what he did to you, because he did the same thing to me and to my mother and to my sister. If you ever need someone to speak about who he is, I will. I wrote her back. We've spoken a few times now on the phone, in the evenings, with the porch light on and a cup of decaf in my hand. She told me about the Christmas her own mother had been seated at the kids' table in Maryville 15 years before me. She told me about the school list her sister had been removed from. She told me, in a quiet, flat voice, that the cologne he wears on weekends is the same cologne he wore in 2009. My friend Linda, who has known me 40 years, since we taught 4th grade in the same school district together. Was skeptical at first. Linda asked me, in the careful way old friends ask hard questions, what Valerie wanted, whether she was settling some score of her own. I thought about it. I told Linda I didn't know, but I told Linda that even if Valerie wanted something, the thing she'd given me, the simple sentence, "You are not crazy, this is who he is," was a gift I could not have given myself. Sometimes the witnesses who arrive are not the ones you'd have chosen. Sometimes they are the only ones who saw the same thing you saw. Megan called twice in the first 6 months. The first time was 3 weeks after I'd left. Her voicemail was angry. How could I do this to the children? How dare I disappear without a forwarding address? Did I understand what I'd done to Derek's business? I did not call back. The second time was 4 months in. Her voicemail was different, quieter. She said, "Mom, I don't know if you're getting these. I wanted to tell you Sophie asked about you today. She wanted to know if you were coming for her birthday. I didn't know what to say. I'm sorry." She did not say what she was sorry for. She did not name it. I did not call back, because the apology that names nothing is not an apology. It is a request to be released from a feeling. I am no longer in the business of releasing other people from their feelings. If someone has edited you out of the picture, literally or otherwise, I want you to know you are not crazy and you are not overreacting. Tell me in the comments, when did you first realize you'd been erased? Was it a Christmas card? A school list? A 4-second pause on the phone? Tell me. I read every one. There are more of us than you think. I have been in Asheville for almost a year now. I have made a small life. I joined a watercolor class at the community center on Haywood Road, taught by a retired set designer named Mariah, who tells me my greens are improving. I take long walks down by the river in the mornings, when the fog is still low and the freight train sounds carry up from the rail yard south of town. I volunteer 2 afternoons a week at a literacy program for adults, which has reminded me, after all these years away from the library, why I went into that work in the first place. The look on a 46-year-old man's face the first time he reads a whole paragraph from a newspaper without stopping. I cook for one, and I have stopped apologizing for it. I bought a second-hand armchair, the kind with worn green velvet and a small cigarette burn on the right arm from a previous life, and a reading lamp with a brass pull chain, and I keep a stack of library books on the floor beside it. And I am reading my way through the Pulitzer fiction list, one slow novel at a time. I miss the children. I want to be honest about that. I miss them with a physical ache that does not go away, that wakes me sometimes at 4 a.m, that visits me when I see a girl Sophie's age in a grocery store wearing a sequined shirt, or a boy Aiden's age on a bicycle. I miss the smell of their hair after a bath. I miss the way Sophie used to fall asleep on my chest during cartoons, her breathing slowing in 3 stages until I knew she was fully gone. I miss the small hot hand of Aiden in mine when we crossed parking lots. The grief of missing them is real, and it lives in my body. I have not learned to outrun it. I do not think I will. But I have learned the difference between the woman I was and the woman I am. The woman I was would have stayed. She would have answered the 14 voicemails. She would have driven back to Knoxville on a Sunday afternoon with a casserole and a forgiveness she had not been asked for. She would have set the children up on the school list and resumed the Thursday pickups and made herself useful again, because being useful felt, for a long time, like the only proof that she was loved. The woman I am understands that being useful is not the same as being loved. The woman who stayed would have disappeared entirely, leaf by leaf, until there was nothing left of her but a chair somebody cropped out of a photograph. The woman who left still has a name. I keep my mother's letter in the top drawer of my nightstand, under a pair of reading glasses and a small bottle of lavender oil I bought at a farmer's market the first week I was here. I take it out sometimes, on the bad nights, and I read it. I read the part where she calls me my Brittany. I read the part where she says she noticed everything. I read the part where she tells me to leave them the empty frame. I fold it back up and I put it away, and I lie in the dark and I talk to her. I tell her where I am. I tell her about the watercolor class. I tell her about the literacy program. I tell her about the maple tree outside my window and the way the light comes through it at 4 p.m, the leaves throwing small moving shapes across the ceiling of the bedroom like a slow green film. I tell her thank you. I tell her thank you in the small, dry, factual way she would have wanted, without sentimentality, without drama, just the word itself, said aloud in a dark room to a woman who was not there to hear it. I think she hears it anyway. I think she set it up so that she would. On the porch this morning, I painted a watercolor of Aiden and Sophie from memory. Aiden has his front teeth back now, in the version I painted, although I have not seen him in person in over a year, and I do not know if that is true. Sophie is wearing the red coat I bought her 2 Christmases ago. I do not know if she still has it. I painted them from love and from imagination, which is the only material I have left for them, and I propped the painting on the windowsill to dry. The rain came in around 11. I sat on the porch and I watched it fall on the maple tree, and I held my coffee cup in both hands and I felt the warmth move from the ceramic into my palms and out into the rest of me. I used to think love and loyalty were the same thing. I was wrong. Loyalty is what you owe the people who show up for you. Love is what you feel for the people who don't. You can carry love for someone for the rest of your life and still understand that they are not safe to be near. Those two truths can live in the same chest. Mine do. I used to think that walking away from your child meant you had failed as a mother. I no longer think that. I think sometimes the most maternal thing a mother can do is refuse to be a resource. Her child is too damaged to stop draining. I think sometimes you save the grandchildren by leaving, not by staying, because the grandmother who stayed would have been a ghost in a chair, and the grandmother who left is a woman who, one day, when those children are grown and looking for the truth about their own childhoods, will still be findable, still be whole, still be herself. If you are listening to this and you recognize yourself in any of it, the children's table, the cropped photograph, the 4-second pause on the phone, I want you to hear me say this clearly. You are allowed to leave. You are allowed to leave without a long explanation. You are allowed to take what is yours and walk out the front door and not look back. The people who love you out loud and treat you like furniture are not, in the end, the people who love you. The people who love you are the ones who, when they are gone, you find out had been building you a door for 30 years without ever telling you. That's the story. One brass key, one framed lease set down on a dessert table, and one envelope of 11 photographs labeled, "I was here." If any part of this landed for you, if you've ever been the grandmother in the chair nobody saved a seat for, or the daughter who is finally starting to see what her mother has been carrying, I want you to do one thing for me before you close this. Drop a comment with the moment you first realized. Subscribe if you haven't, because there are more stories like this one and the women in them deserve to be heard. And take care of yourself this week. Eat something warm. Call the person who actually picks up. Hang a photograph somewhere you can see it, with your